everyone, welcome back to the next video in our NOSS series. I think previously we were talking about setting up the network, establishing a successful connectivity, troubleshooting and testing the network. So that would be checkpoint one. So which in this case for us, right? So ignore these things, right? So in this case, so we should have you should have watched the videos which are about setting up the network. So it should be possibly the introduction and then set up the server and the client, which is series video 2 in NOSS series, and then we try to establish connectivity. So the client will communicate with the server, this client will communicate to this server, and this two servers will communicate because they are in the same external network. However, this network and this network won't communicate. So that would have been in the second video in the series, and I mean the third video in the series where we had the successful connectivity. And in case of any issues, we should have troubleshooted it and tested it so the connectivity is successful. And that would be the checkpoint one, where we have completed part one of the work, which is literally the coursework one. So we are moving into the second aspect of it. So you should have seen video number 5, I think, which allows ICMP. So we set firewall rules to allow ICMP traffic. So this part is done. We are now moving to install routing and remote access services. So in this video, what we are going to do is we are just going to skip the site-to-site VPN for a moment. The reason why I'm skipping site-to-site VPN here is previously in the lectures we were talking about routing, the importance of routing, what's the purpose of routing, what are the different types of routing, and all those concepts. So I thought of giving you a demonstration on how routing works. So what we will do here is instead of going into a site-to-site VPN, so let's first configure a routing protocol, which means we'll be doing a RIP version 2 to successfully connect between two networks. So we will do that. We will install remote and routing and remote access services. And then we will go into configuring a routing protocol, and then we will create forest. We will create the child domain in this video, and later we will discuss about we will look into the DNS configurations, and then we will go into site-to-site VPN and DHCP services, and then we move into user accounts and mounting drives and troubleshooting things, leaving the sharing disk drives, IS server and RDS for you to go and do the research, right? Okay, so let's go with installing the remote routing and remote access services. So before we go in, here is our server. So if I just go to our server here, right, my server is not responding at the moment. I don't want the client for now. Okay, my client and servers, my servers are not responding, so let me power it off and restart. My SDDC, I will restart. So what I did is eventually I was restoring the snapshot. I done a couple of other things as well, so I wanted to restore it to the original position. Power off, power off. Right, so I restarted the mission, nothing else. So let's see if it works well. Here we go. We have our server DC. Others unplanned. Let's go to my command prompt. So ipconfig. So here we have an external network which is 10.0.0.1. We have an internal network which is 192.168.1.1, and I have an additional Ethernet added to it. It's just a NAT network, just for me to reach for internet. I'm doing multiple other things as well with this topology. So I wanted to install Wireshark to capture some packets. So I need internet to download and install Wireshark. So I did that. It's not mandatory for you to do it, but if you want to capture the packets, check it. Yes, you can also do it. Right. So I'm just checking if I have everything restored. Yep, the external network. I haven't configured the DNS. Um, Internal network, I haven't configured the DNS. Yep, all fine. So let's start with our server manager here. Let's go to my local server. It's SDC and it's in a work group. So I'm going to create a domain controller and I'm going to add SDC as my root domain. So if I just recall you the presentation or the lecture which we did about domain Active Directories domain services, just to recap you, domain services, Active Directory offers you a lot of services. So it has domain services, it provides certificate services, federation services, lightweight directory services, right management services. So there are different services which is provided by Active Directories, and that's one of the advantages or pros of positive uh, aspect of going for a Windows server environment. So here we are going to work on domain services. We are going to create a domain and we are going to create a domain controller. So the purpose of creating a domain controller is, you centralize the accounts, authorization, authentication. You take a overall control. Okay. So if I just go here, just to reiterate what we did in our lectures. So it's about manageability, security, and interoperability, right? So what are the things it could do in a perspective of a client, in a perspective of a user, in a perspective of a server, the applications, the network devices, email servers, if we want. We are not going to implement all these aspects, but what we are focusing or using an Active Directory is, or a domain services in an Active Directory is, to maintain a centralized directory. We will be working on it. A single sign-on access to the network, security, scalability, manageability probably. So in a Windows client, we will manage the profile of the client, the network information, the policies. We will eventually do a few of them. In a user's perspective, we can create users, control the users, privilege, add privileges to them, add policy, enforce policies to them, add account informations to them. So the same way for network devices, for server, it's about how you manage it, what are the informations, how are you going to share, what kind of resources you are going to share. So all these things are controlled using Active Directory domain services. So here what we are going to do is, in this topology which we are working, so this is going to be the root domain, which would be your name.nos. That's what the coursework says here. And if I'm just going to take this topology, it's again the same thing. We're going to install routing and remote access services, as well as we are going to create a forest, make one of the server as a domain controller. So we are going to do section E and section B at the moment. Uh, so this SDC is going to be our domain controller, and this network is going to be our root domain, and this one is going to be our child domain. So we are going to work on this in this video. And the purpose of doing this is to get overall control, overall scalable network as well. So if you can scroll down, so these are the different services which is offered. So you can you should have a DNS infrastructure, a domain controller, um, and ADDS, Active Directory integrated zones for DNS, and domain name system. So we will look into each aspect of it. The other thing which I want to say is, yeah, a domain itself has a domain controller. It could have multiple domain controllers, but for our case, we are just using a domain controller. It has control over the computers. It has a group of computers, group of users, and it could also have groups where you can mix and match things as well. So precisely this is our example or topology which we have. We have a forest root domain, which would be, in my case, it is nitish.nos. And then I will also have a child domain, which will be ld.nitish.nos. So they will have everything, in common, or they can trust each other, right? That's what precisely the point is. All right. So let's go and start it. So if I want to add any roles and features to any of the server, so this is the point here. So I go add roles and features, next, role-based installation, and then here we go. Select a server. So yeah, I could see the IP address, it's a DC. Right here. So the first thing I want to do is add a domain services. So when I click on the domain services here, it says it is going to add features like this. It is going to add ADDS tools, an administrative center, and a command line snap-ins. It is going to add a directory module for Windows PowerShell. Yeah, we will be eventually working on PowerShell as well. Maybe I will work on a specific video to show you how PowerShells work. They are effective tools. I say yes, add features. Because I'm doing it now, I can just do it for other I can add other services as well. So I just go for DHCP server because we need DHCP. I will go for DNS because we need DNS. We'll be working on it. I need remote access. I'm going to click on remote access as well. Okay, right. Here is a note. You don't want to necessarily do everything at the same time. So you can just go for Active Directory domain services at the moment, and then whenever you need a DHCP, then you can go and add DHCP. Whenever you want DNS, you can add DNS. But when you add the domain services, but the default DNS will be also configured. Like I said in the presentation, it has a combination of DNS and directory services, so it will be installed, but not necessarily a remote access. So if you don't want remote access to be installed now, you can uncheck it. But because I'm doing it um, all at once in a video, so I don't want to go and do it multiple times, so I'm just checking everything. So you can either do it all at once, or you can just do it one at a time. It's up to you. I'm just adding roles to the server. I have to configure it later. Okay, so I go to next. If I want to add any of the features to it, I can add it. For now, I'm just adding the role, so I don't focus here. I don't want anything from the features, so I skip it. I just go next, DNS server, remote access. And here, when I come to the remote access, it asks me what are the role services you want. So eventually I will be needing routing. So I click routing, it says what are the features it has. I say add all the features, and it will automatically select direct access and VPN. So we will also need VPN as well, so we can click that. But web application proxy, I'm not going to do it now because I don't want that for now to work on it. So I click on these features. So whichever we know that we are going to use, we can add them to the server. So it asks for an IAS. I go with the default setting here. I confirm it, and I'm going to install it. Trust me, it is going to take a while for you to install. Um, um, so you have to be very patient enough. Don't do it in the last minute. It could take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 50 minutes, 1 hour, even a day. It depends upon how the your host machines are. Right. So let me pass it now and come back once the feature has been installed. Right. Okay. So my installation is done here. So you could see that installation succeeded. It has installed Active Directory. It asks to promote the server. We can either click here to promote it as a domain controller. It asks to complete DHCP configurations, which we are not going to do it now because this is not our DHCP server. It asks to get into direct access or VPNs. It has installed DNS server, group policy management, administrative kit. Yeah. Oops. My mouse just got stuck. Okay. So yeah, so it has installed web servers, remote server administration tools, and other things. So whatever tools are required, whatever packages are required for these roles, everything has been installed here. So I'm just closing it here, and then if you could notice here, there's a flag which says the notification. You can go and here, click on it. You could see, right, either I want to add roles and features, or I want to go for for this server to be a domain controller, or a DHCP configurations, or direct access. So for now, our idea is to promote this server as a domain controller. So let's go and promote this server as a domain controller. Right. So before we go and promote this as a domain controller, let's quickly go and look at our IP configurations, ipconfig/all. So I have my Ethernet 2, which is a local domain. We don't want to look into it. So I haven't configured DNS here. I haven't configured any DNS. DNS is actually a domain name server, right? So let's look at refer to the recent lecture which we had on domain name DNS, right? So let's go into DNS first, and then we will move into configure DNS, and then we will add that as a domain controller. So referring to our lectures which we have done recently, so DNS is a tree hierarchy. It's a domain name system. So it's going to map the domain name with the IP addresses and vice versa. It maybe in a right word, it resolves the names. The domain names are resolved into IP addresses and vice versa. That's what DNS is. So with these examples, so let's go in here, the important aspect which I have to look here is. So this is a very important thing. So what happens is we have a computer, and if the computer is going for a domain name, so let's say if it wants to go and access a server, let's say uh, abc.com, right? It doesn't know what is the IP address of abc.com because it just accesses the domain name, not the IP address. So it needs someone to help assist with uh, with resolving that IP address to the domain name, and that's what a DNS server will be doing. A domain name systems server will be doing. So we could eventually have a local DNS server, which we will be having. So here in this case, for our network, what we are planning is we are planning to have our SDC as our DNS. So this will have the DNS entries of the local servers or the local files, web servers, whatever services we are going to provide. It will have uh, the IP addresses and the domain names so that it could, uh, you know, get those resolve those IP addresses to the names. Okay, so we want to configure our SDC as a domain controller. Sorry, a DNS server, so that if a client wants to go and access someone, so let's say uh, a web server which is webserver.nitish.nos, and it just go for webserver.nitish.nos. It doesn't know the IP address, so it goes to the uh, DNS server and asks, hey, I'm looking for a webserver.nitish.nos. Can you resolve the IP address? And then the DNS server will resolve the IP address and it will give it back. So because our DC server is focused on an enterprise network or an internal network, so will our DNS server be capable of holding all the domain names and its IP address? No, it won't. So what happens is, uh, just referring to our lecture, so initially a query goes in that goes to our local DNS. There may be clusters of DNS servers, maybe more than one. In our case, we have only one DNS server. So it raises a query to the DNS server asking for uh, the DNS server to resolve an IP address. If the DNS server has that entry with it, it will re reply back telling that, hey, for in this case it's lec1.nos.com. It asks for a resolving the IP address of lec1.nos.com, and it will come back. If it has it, it will come back and say, hey, here is the IP address, I could resolve it. Which means that for lec1.nos.com, I have to go to the DNS server and manually enter the IP addresses, give the information so it could resolve it. I can't do it for, or a system administrator, as a system administrator, you can't do it for all the domain names which are available. So what if it goes, if the computer one wants to go for nitish.com, and it goes and asks for like, hey, DNS server, give me nitish.com's, resolve me nitish.com's IP address. It doesn't have it because we haven't entered it. So what it will do is, this DNS server, the local DNS server, will now send its query to a cluster of root servers or root DNS. Okay, so that we call it as the root. Okay, so the root domain. So it goes and asks to the root domain. Say, hey, I'm queried for a nitish.com, but I don't have nitish.com. Can you help me? The root domain will also not have information about nitish.com, but it will have an IP address which would say that, hey, I don't know nitish.com's, I can't resolve nitish.com's IP address, but I know an IP address of .com. So can you go to .com and ask for the IP address for nitish.com, and .com will help you. So that will be the response to this DNS. So now the DNS uses the IP address of .com, goes and reaches the .com server and asks, hey, I'm looking for nitish.com. Can you resolve it? And now the .com server, because it's a .com domain, so it will say that, oh, okay, this is what Nitish.com's IP address is. So it will resolve it. Okay. So that's how it works. So any queries between the DNS server and the computer or the client, it would be a recursive query because it goes in, comes back. I know I have it, here it is. Or I don't know, I'm sorry, right? So this is a recursive query. This part is an iterative query because it goes here, it comes back, it goes here, it comes back. So it's an iterative query. Okay, so this is how DNS works. So what we are going to do here is, I'm sorry, what we are going to do here is we're going to go and configure the DNS server, telling that this is the IP address, this is what it's going to do, this is the domain name, this is the IP address kind of thing. If you want to do that, you go here and you could see DNS here, click on the DNS. So when you click on the DNS, you can see that you have a lot of options here: forward, reverse, lookup zones, trust points, conditional forwards, root hens. So the root hens, if you just click on the root hens, these are the root hens which you have, which means so it has server fully qualified domain name, which is a root.servers.net, and the IP address is something. So these are the root hens which could resolve queries from different zones that do not exist on the local DNS server. Okay, uh, they are only used if forwarders are not configured or failed. Right. So coming back here, what is a forwarder? So a forwarder is something what I said here just now, explained a minute ago. So if I don't know, what should I do? I have to forward it. So is that like every time I have to go and forward it? No. I can configure forwarders. I can configure conditional forwarders. For example, I have a condition like if you want to go and access, if you want to query for Nitish.com, you can query it locally. Others, you go out. That's a conditional forwarding. Okay. Or if you want to go for Nitish.com, go and ask this particular DNS server. That is a conditional forwarding. Okay. So if you haven't configured any conditional forwarding, that's when it uses the IP addresses of the root hens. Okay. Um, we can create our conditional forwarders here. So you click on the conditional forwarders. Oops, no. Yep. So I can add conditional forwarders or I can add forwarders here, right? I can add lookup zones, forward lookup zones or reverse lookup zones. So if I want to add a forwarder, I click on the forwarder, go to the properties, and here's the forwarder. So I don't have any forwarders here, but I can add forwarders into it. So click here to add an IP address or a DNS name. So I can say I'm going to add a forwarder. So if anything is not picking up here, then I can say that forwarded to, let's say, um, 8.8.8.8. So it's 8.8.8.8. So when it is 8.8.8.8, it goes to Google's DNS, right? So this is a default forwarder. So if I don't have a forwarder configured, then by default it goes to access the root hens, which is the it, which is the root servers here. So if I have a forwarder, if I specifically say that, okay, this is the DNS which you want to go and access, it will go to that particular DNS server to resolve the IP addresses of a domain name, or vice versa if it is a reverse lookup, right? If I don't state anything, it refers to the root and these are the IP addresses of the DNS servers it has, which it will go on. So this is how you add forwarders to it. You can also add, conditional forwarders. So if you just go to the conditional forwarders and right click, so you can add conditional forwarders. Like if you want to go for, let's say, we are not creating any web servers at the moment. So for example, let's say if you're going to create a web server 1.nos.natish.nos, right? So it is going to it says that no such host is known web server because we haven't created. Okay, so just on this case, what we can do is we can add maybe another conditional forwarder. So let's say if you want to look for natish.com, you go for 8.8.4.4, right? So it should be www.natish.com. No, sorry. So it should be 8.8.4.4. Um, so this is a conditional forwarding which I have. Okay, so it is again another Google's DNS server. Okay, yeah. So here I can go and give my domain name. So I could say www.natish.com. So this is the domain name. And if for this domain name, you can go and look at this DNS server, which is again as a Google. So I'm just giving an example. So if we are running a server and we can say that, okay, and then I can add another conditional forwarder. I could say that server 1.natish.nos, and for that you go and look at 192.168.1.1, which is this server. It tries to attempt and resolve for it, but it is not finding it out now because we don't have uh, a server working on it, right? But still, this is what conditional forward is. So forwarding on based on a condition. So you can add a new zone here for a forward lookup zone. So you go and you create a primary zone or a secondary zone or a stub zone. For here in our case, it's going to be a primary zone. You can give a zone name and then you can move forward. Okay, we will do this part later. I don't want to have too much of things covered in one video. We'll go into that, but this is the common understanding of what DNS is. So this is how we configure DNS. So with that, we just go in here. So precisely our aim is to make this server as our DNS server. So I go to the properties, go to my IP. So I don't have a gateway because this is my server. Preferred DNS server, I would say it is 192.168.1.1. Either I can give 192.168.1.1, which is this server itself because this is my DNS server, or I can say that yeah, okay, I can give in a different way as well. So I'm not telling that different alternate way. You can go and do a research and find it out. Okay, so I'm telling that this is my DNS server. I've done that. So okay, close. So I've configured DNS. So far we have discussed about what is DNS and how can we configure DNS, what is a forwarder, what is a root hint, referring to our lectures which we have done. Right. So now let's go here to promote this server as a domain controller. So it says promote this server as a domain controller, and it's still loading, so we can just hold on a minute. Right, so what I did is I'm just waiting here. It still takes a while. It's trying to fetch things up. So I just click on add roles, go here, promote this server as a domain controller. So when I promote this as a domain controller, it asks me add a domain controller to an existing domain, add a new domain to an existing forest, or add a new forest, because this is our root domain. This is a new forest which we are creating. I just go in and I just give natish.nos. This is the new forest I'm going to create. Go on to next. So it says that select functional levels of a new forest or root domain. So the forest functional level, the highest level is 2016 server. So we will leave that as 2016 server itself. And that's the latest version we have. So we just go and give a directory services restore mode password. Here in this case, I'm going to give my password here. Right, and then I'm going to give next. It says that the DNS, the delegation for the DNS server cannot be created because an authoritative parent zone cannot be found. We haven't created the parent zone. You can click show more. It says cannot be found, or it does not run Windows DNS server. If you are integrating with an existing DNS infrastructure, you should manually create a delegation for it. Otherwise, no action is required. So we are not merging it with existing zone, so it's fine. So give next. It will try to now fetch the domain name, which we recently created now. It will not take a while. Here we go. So nitish.nos is my forest, my root domain. So Nitish is the domain name. So it picked the domain. It should be the right one. So you have to check it. You are not entering anything. It's automatically fetching from the domain configurations you have done. So here it says the location of your directory services or domain services database. So if you can go to C Windows and TDS, you could find the database folder, the log files, and sysvol folders. So next, configure the server as a directory in a new forest. It gives you all a summary of what you have done. So next, it is now going to check whether the prerequisites needed to promote this as a domain controller is all set or all good. So it will take a bit of time to check the prerequisites, and based on that, we will promote this server as a domain controller. So here it says that all prerequisite checks pass successfully. So you have some notifications here or some warning messages. You can ignore those warning messages. The only important thing here is you should have a green text says all prerequisite checks pass successfully. So all good. So let's install it. So we have almost installed things. So it says that the server was successfully configured as a domain controller. So immediately when it's configured as a domain controller, it will ask for a restart or a sign off. So you give OK. So when it comes back, it would be a domain controller now. a completely different phase of it, a powerful control, a transformation from a normal server to a domain controller, right? So now, so here we go, and it's a control alt delete, and now you could see it's not a local administrator. It says that it is from a domain and it's nitish.nos or nitish domain, and it's an administrator here. So I'm just going to give my password and it should welcome. So officially we are now in a domain controller, which means we have done almost this. We have done we have installed routing and remote access. We haven't gone and access that. We have even configured it. We will do it in a minute. So we have created a forest and made one as a domain controller. We have done this part here. So you can now go and see the local server, and it says that it belongs to a work group, which is nitish.nos. So I can go in here and look for different Active Directory resources. So one of the things which we'll be looking at is the users and computers. So if I'm just going to click the users and computers, it's for the nitish.nos domain. So I have a collection of computers, I have collection of users, right? So I can create a user here. So that user will be part of the full domain, okay? And so instead of going and creating users for the client, users for the server, users for another client, you just create users in your domain controller, which can be authenticated or which can be logged in any of the clients which are part of the domain, right? I think now it makes some sense if you're when you're logging into a SOAK domain, right? So we are not creating user accounts in each missions individually, but you just go to Lee's office and ask Lee. Lee will create a user for you, and then you can access from any of the SOAK missions. So this is how it happens. So you go to the technician. If you are the administrator, you go here, create a new user, and you can write new user. So I say name is N. Right, let's say I will give my name. So Nitish, I don't have anything, so I say NITHES, nitish.com. So next, user must change the password. So I'm just giving the password here. User password never expires. Next, finish. So here I have a user called Nitish. I can right click, go to the properties. I can now add as a, it's just an user now. I can add administrators group, so they will be part of administrators as well. So I apply, I can make changes if I want. I give okay. So this is just an example of users. So the same way you go to computers, there are no computers because we have created a domain controller, but we haven't added any computers to it. So what we will do is now we will go and add a computer, which is the client. So let's go to this client, turn off this client. So here in our topology, um, we have created this as a domain controller. This is now a domain controller, and now we have created in user Nitish. We will also create export the users from the Excel sheet later. So now what we are going to do is we are going to add this client part of this domain. Okay, it's in the network, okay, but it's not part of the domain. So we are going to go and add that machine, the client here, as part of SDC domain. Here we go. So it's L user. So we log in here, and if I just go to the computer, right click the Windows options system. So it says that the PC is right. Let's go to the advanced system settings here. Computer name. So here it says that the computer name is S-Client. We changed it in our previous activity. So it is part of work group. Here, this is part of Nitish.NOSS, right? So now you understand the difference. Being inside a network doesn't mean that it can be controlled by the domain controller. It can't. It is just a network, so they can communicate. So if I'm just going to go for a ipconfig here, ping 192.168.1.1, it will ping because it is in the same network. But is this controlled by the domain controller? No, it is not, because in the domain, if we just go to the computers, we can't see anything in these computers. If I refresh, nothing is there, which means that the domain controller can now restrict all its resources only available to its domain members. No others can access it, which means you can't access any of the resources. So if you want to access resources within the network, you need to be part of that work group, which is Nitish.NOSS here. So we have to go here, change it to the domain. So I say Nitish.NOSS is my domain. I just give OK. Oops, it says an active directory for the domain nitish.com could not be contacted. Right, this is another thing which could not be contacted. It could not talk to the domain controller. Ensure that the domain name is typed correctly. Nitish.nos, it's correctly typed. If the name is correct, click details for troubleshooting. So I can click the details and it picks up that, oh, the DNS is the problem when the DNS is querying. So that's the thing, right? So if I go to nitish.com, so ns lookup nitish.nos, it can't find nitish.com because it doesn't have a DNS server. So ipconfig/all. So you could see that it doesn't have any DNS servers on it. So if there is no DNS server, like uh, we just discussed about it, this guy is asked to reach to nitish.nos. It doesn't have an IP address, so it wants to look for a DNS server to resolve the IP address. It doesn't have a DNS server, so it cannot resolve anything. So let's first sort out that problem. So let's go here and then go to the network properties, and we have the gateway. Let's go here. It's 192.168.1.1, which is my domain controller, which is going to be my DNS server as well. So this is my DNS server. Can you please contact that DNS server? It could contact it because it can successfully ping. The only thing is it is not part of the domain. That means it can't access the resources within the domain, but it still can ping, right? We just saw that uh, just here when we try to ping. So now it knows where 192.168.1.1 is. It will go resolve the IP address of nitish.nos and then try to get connected to the domain. Right, let's go in here. Right, okay. So now let's try it in a domain nitish.nos. Okay, and here we go. it asks for a permission. Oh, you want to join the domain? They have to. An admin should give you authorization straight. And then I give the password. I am giving the login credentials of my domain. Okay. And then I give OK. Fingers crossed. Here we go. Welcome to nitish.nos domain. Okay, you must restart it. Okay, let's restart it. Restart now. By the time it is restarting, we go here, refresh. Now you could see that a client is added. So which means now nitish.com is a root domain. It's a parent domain and it has users and clients to it. Okay, so you go to the client, you add the client to a group, you disable the account, you can have pretty much almost the control. So you can see what kind of an operating system it is, what are the membership it has. You can create your own group, and then from the group you can assign the computers to different group as well, right? So yeah, so what we have done here in this video is we have successfully added a forest, created a forest and successfully converted this SDC as a domain controller, and we have added the client machine within the Swansea network as a member of this domain.